When it all ends for a narcissist, the crazy thing they end up doing. Every narcissist eventually reaches the moment they dread most, the breaking point. The charm that once hypnotized begins to lose its shine. The lies that once dazzled now unravel, and the power they fed upon starts to crumble before their eyes. Psychologists tell us this collapse is inevitable, because manipulation is like a fire that cannot burn forever. And when it dies out, the narcissist is left gasping for fuel, scrambling in desperation. And in that scramble, their true nature is revealed. Their first weapon, denial. They cannot face the reality that their endless supply of admiration has dried up, so they cling to fantasy. Psychologists call it cognitive dissonance, the refusal to acknowledge truth. You'll see it in the carefully staged smiles plastered across social media, the exaggerated boasts of success, the flawless facade paraded before the world, all while the walls behind them quietly collapse. Denial becomes their armor, shielding them from the unbearable reality they refuse to face. But denial cannot hold forever. When the cracks show, rage explodes. Psychologists explain that when their mask slips, narcissists lash out at the very people who once gave them power. They weaponize blame, launch smear campaigns, and unleash verbal assaults, all in a desperate attempt to claw back control. Yet the irony is cruel. The more they rage, the more people pull away. Instead of regaining strength, they scatter fear, burn bridges, and drive everyone further from their orbit. When fury fails, desperation takes another shape, hoovering. Psychologists describe this as a narcissist attempt to pull old victims back into their web. The sweet texts, the teary apologies, the dramatic confessions, they're never about love, never about reconciliation. They are survival tactics wrapped in sentiment. The hidden message is always the same: I need your attention again. And when those pleas go unanswered, their collapse deepens into despair. Others attempt escape through chaos. Psychologists warn that without constant validation, narcissists often chase reckless distractions, shopping sprees, substance abuse, shallow affairs. For a moment, these highs feel like oxygen, but they always crash. Each reckless choice adds another layer of destruction, dragging them further into the abyss they refuse to confront. Then comes the panic of isolation. Psychologists remind us that nothing terrifies a narcissist more than being unseen, because their very identity depends on an audience. When people withdraw, they are forced to confront the emptiness inside. To silence that emptiness, they stir chaos, gossiping, provoking conflict, manufacturing drama, anything to feel relevant again, even if it poisons every room they enter. When all else fails, they reach for their most manipulative mask, the victim. Psychologists call this the professional martyr act. Suddenly, the narcissist claims to be the one betrayed, abused, or misunderstood. Sympathy becomes their last hope of pulling others back. But the act wears thin. Sooner or later, even the most compassionate grow tired of the endless theatrics, and the spotlight fades once again, leaving the narcissist exposed in the harsh glare of reality. Regret sometimes creeps in, but it is never what it seems. Psychologists clarify, narcissists do not grieve people, they grieve the loss of power. They don't miss you, they miss how you made them feel. And so begins the endless cycle of replacements, cycling through new faces, new admirers, desperate to fill a void that can never be filled. To protect what's left of their fragile ego, they rewrite history. I never cared anyway. They were always the problem. Psychologists point out that this is self-deception, a prison of illusions built to protect them from truth. But the cost is high. Every time they deny reality, they chain themselves more tightly to the very patterns that guarantee their downfall. And then comes the moment they cannot escape. The endgame every narcissist fears most, facing themselves. Without the mask, without the audience, without the supply of attention, they are left with the very demons they've run from all their lives: shame, insecurity, emptiness. Some break down under the weight. Others lash out in destructive chaos, inventing crises, exaggerating illnesses, creating financial disasters. anything to drag people back into their collapsing orbit. But in the silence that follows, one truth remains. The mask is gone, and there is nowhere left to hide. But as these cycles repeat, even the most loyal begin to wake up. The illusion cracks. The charm that once dazzled now feels hollow, and the performance no longer holds its spell. Slowly, the narcissist is left alone, face to face with the one truth they can no longer escape. Sensing the well of admiration drying up, they scramble for supply in the most unlikely corners. Psychologists note how they suddenly turn their attention to co-workers, distant relatives, even strangers online. But what once looked effortless now reeks of desperation. Their tactics are tired, their charm strained, their need transparent. Instead of drawing people in, they drain them. And without constant validation, the carefully constructed persona begins to crumble. Some retreat into fantasy, weaving elaborate stories about their greatness, their romances, their importance in society. Psychologists explain these fictions act as a shield, soothing the fragile ego for a while. But the cost is steep. The deeper they sink into fantasy, the more isolated they become. Eventually, no one believes the stories anymore, and they are left imprisoned in a world of their own invention, where lies feel safer than truth, and imagination becomes their only refuge. Others cling to scraps of control. Psychologists observe how they obsess over tiny victories, nitpicking relentlessly, dominating conversations, micromanaging trivial routines. These petty battles give fleeting satisfaction, but they also reveal the hollowness beneath. Once masters of manipulation, they shrink into tyrants of detail, exposing just how powerless they have become. Then comes retaliation. When direct control slips away, many launch smear campaigns. Psychologists emphasize how they twist narratives, spread rumors, and cast themselves as the victim. But with time, the mask falls here too. People connect the dots. Their credibility erodes, and the poison they tried to pour on others corrodes their own reputation instead, leaving them even more isolated. And isolation is the punishment they dread most. Psychologists remind us that narcissists cannot survive without an audience. When the applause dies and the circle shrinks, they are forced to sit with the emotions they've always run from: shame, fear, emptiness. The silence becomes unbearable. They fill it with noise, with distractions, with anything to numb the void. But the emptiness always returns, louder, harsher, inescapable. Desperation drives some into reckless relationships. Psychologists observe how they rush headfirst into romance, accelerating intimacy, grasping for validation. But the patterns repeat. The mask slips. The new partner sees what others saw before. And once again, the relationship collapses, another mirror reflecting the truth they refuse to face. The problem was never them. The problem was always themselves. Others stage a dramatic reinvention. Psychologists highlight how they suddenly claim spiritual awakenings, newfound humility, even commitments to therapy. On the surface, it looks like change, but scratch beneath, and the same performance is revealed. Without true accountability, the transformation is nothing more than costume, another disguise, another act in the endless cycle. The harder they fight to hold on, the more obvious the manipulation becomes. Psychologists explain that once people recognize the pattern, the tricks lose their power. What once inspired sympathy now provokes exhaustion. Their tears look rehearsed, their words feel recycled, and when the audience stops believing, the performance collapses. Some sink into bitterness, replaying betrayals in their mind, convincing themselves the world has conspired against them. Psychologists describe how this resentment seeps into everything, driving people even further away. Instead of healing, they cling to anger, and bitterness becomes their only companion. Envy cuts sharper too. They watch from the sidelines as former partners and friends rebuild, thrive, and rise. Psychologists note how this success fuels a silent rage, because every achievement of others highlights their own emptiness. They cannot admit they were the architects of their downfall, so they stew in jealousy, consumed by the life they lost but can never reclaim. Others drown in compulsions, workaholism, addictions, endless distractions. Psychologists explain these obsessions provide a fleeting illusion of control, like bandages over deep wounds. But when the distractions fade, the silence roars back louder than ever. And with it comes the truth they've tried to bury. They are fractured, desperate, and more exposed than ever before. Some narcissists cling to the past as if it's the only place left where they still matter. Psychologists note how they resurrect old victories, stories of relationships long gone, career triumphs, or fleeting moments of glory. To outsiders, it sounds like pride, but beneath the surface, it is desperation. The nostalgia reveals the emptiness of their present. With nothing in the now to soothe their ego, they retreat into memory, because the uncertainty of the future feels far too dangerous. But that backward gaze doesn't save them, it crushes them. Psychologists emphasize that when the mask finally slips away, the void they've avoided all their lives swallows them whole. Stripped of validation, they lose their sense of worth. Their identity, once stitched together from other people's admiration, collapses into despair. And instead of facing the brutal truth, they retreat further inward, sinking into a depression that deepens with every refusal to look honestly at themselves. Even when therapy could offer a lifeline, most resist it. Psychologists explain that admitting fault feels more terrifying than living in pain. Some dip their toes into counseling, but the moment their defenses are challenged, they bolt. Growth demands vulnerability, and to them, vulnerability feels like death. So they sabotage their own recovery, choosing the illusion of invincibility over the reality of healing. And in that choice, they lock themselves in the very prison they built. Others attempt a reinvention. Suddenly, they parade as models of generosity, humility, or spiritual awakening. Psychologists highlight how carefully they curate this new persona, desperate to impress outsiders. But behind closed doors, nothing changes. Those who know them best see through the act. And the double life becomes exhausting, draining energy while leaving the emptiness untouched, gnawing at them from within. Some chase trophies of success as substitutes for real love. Psychologists describe how they flaunt wealth, status, possessions, luxury cars, sprawling homes, prestigious titles, as armor against the void. But no object can soothe what rots inside. At night, surrounded by everything they thought would make them powerful, they still lie awake, restless, hollow, unsatisfied. As the end creeps closer, control becomes their obsession. Psychologists explain how they tighten their grip on the few who remain, demanding loyalty, suffocating every bond. But the more they clutch, the faster those bonds snap. Even the most loyal eventually break free, leaving the narcissist surrounded by the rubble of relationships they themselves destroyed. The downfall doesn't usually come with fire and thunder. It's slower, quieter. Psychologists emphasize how their old tricks, rage, manipulation, denial, begin to fail. They recycle the same tactics in desperation, blind to the fact that no one is listening anymore. And when the curtain finally falls, what's exposed is not a mask, but the raw emptiness that was always there. And then, their greatest fear arrives, being alone with themselves. Psychologists remind us this is the nightmare at the heart of narcissism. Without supply, silence is torture. They fill it with chaos, with distractions, with noise, but nothing drowns it out. No drama can erase the truth. And the reality they spend a lifetime escaping closes in on them, merciless and inescapable. Some scramble for replacements, leaping from one friendship, one romance, one social circle to another. Psychologists note how every connection feels shallower than the last. Nothing compares to the intoxicating power they once commanded. The cycle becomes endless, hollow bond after hollow bond, proving again and again that the void can never be filled. Others lash out at the world itself. Psychologists describe how they rage against society, ranting about betrayal, about injustice, about shifting values. But this fury is only camouflage for the implosion happening inside. And with every outburst, they drive people further away, accelerating their own collapse. For many, the past becomes a prison. Psychologists explain how they obsessively replay old battles, rewriting them so they always win. In their mind, they're the victim and the victor all at once. But these mental trials bring no peace, only wasted energy, trapped in stories no one else remembers, trapped in wounds that never heal. And as the collapse deepens, paranoia takes hold. Psychologists warn that some narcissists begin to see enemies in every shadow, convinced that others are conspiring against them. The control they once clung to slips further from their grasp, replaced by suspicion and fear, trapping them in a world where trust dies and everyone feels like a threat. Paranoia often marks the final stage of decline. Psychologists observe how narcissists convince themselves that whispers follow them everywhere, that people are laughing at their downfall, plotting in secret, celebrating their ruin. These fears are not born from reality, but from the fragility of an ego too weak to face responsibility. And the tragedy is this: in their terror, they push away even those who still care, until they are surrounded only by shadows of suspicion. In rare cases, a few dare to look inward. Psychologists stress that only a small minority attempt true self-reflection. And when they do, the process is brutal. Confronting years, sometimes decades, of destruction means facing guilt, shame, and the terror of seeing themselves without illusion. For some, this agony sparks the first flicker of growth. But for most, the burden proves too heavy. They retreat before transformation can take root, running once more from the truth. Financial ruin often follows. Psychologists explain how their obsession with appearances drives reckless spending. They flaunt wealth to uphold the illusion of success, until reality closes in. Debts rise like chains, survival becomes desperate, and some even try to exploit others for money. But trust is already shattered, and the doors they once opened with ease now slam shut, leaving them exposed, not just emotionally, but financially too. Others vanish into isolation. Psychologists note how, when admiration dries up, narcissists retreat from friends, family, gatherings, hiding from shame. But solitude is no refuge. In the silence, there is no applause, no distraction, only the reflection they feared all along. The unmasked self, stripped of everything. The body eventually reveals the cost. Psychologists highlight how unrelenting stress, buried rage, and endless turmoil manifest as illness, sometimes severe. Yet instead of acknowledging the link between their choices and their decline, they turn to blame. Denial becomes their final shield, the last wall separating them from the truth. Their credibility almost never recovers. Psychologists emphasize that once their tactics are unmasked, reputations rarely heal. Even if they attempt reinvention, the past follows them like a shadow, whispers and stories that never fade. Each fresh start collapses under the weight of old scars. Without trust, no foundation holds. What remains is endless collapse, endless reinvention, with nothing real to sustain it. Relationships dissolve one by one. Psychologists point out that partners, friends, even family eventually reach their limit. The drama, the manipulation, the volatility, it all becomes too much. One by one, people walk away. And when the dust settles, the narcissist is left not with love or loyalty, but with shallow acquaintances. The very emptiness they feared most becomes reality, crafted by their own hands. Some cling to delusion until the bitter end. Psychologists explain how they rewrite their story, convincing themselves they never truly lost, that their greatness endures. Outwardly, they project confidence. Inwardly, they know the truth. This fantasy spares them from despair, but it also chains them to the very cycle they needed to break. Others keep refining their manipulations. Psychologists observe how, even in decline, they prey on the vulnerable, the inexperienced, the trusting, the naive. But the schemes burn out faster and faster. Word spreads, lessons are learned, and eventually even the vulnerable stop falling for the act. Each failed ploy leaves them with fewer options, fewer targets, fewer chances. And then comes regret. Silent, unspoken, but relentless. Psychologists emphasize that many narcissists carry grief for the partners, the children, the friends they destroyed. In the quiet hours, they replay what could have been, haunted by bonds they can never repair. Some drown that regret in arrogance, boasting louder, exaggerating past triumphs. But the louder they shout, the hollower it sounds, because the truth always whispers louder, reminding them of everything they lost, everything they cannot regain. Eventually, exhaustion wins. Psychologists note that years of manipulation, denial, rage, and endless performance drain them dry, until there is nothing left to fight with, no energy to deceive, no strength to pretend. The collapse they resisted for so long does not arrive in fire and spectacle. It arrives in silence, a quiet implosion, where a lifetime of illusions crumbles under its own unbearable weight. In the end, their pace slows. The act that once flowed effortlessly now feels impossible. The mask slips, the facade fractures, and the performance they clung to for survival finally collapses. And while it isn't always loud or theatrical, the silence cuts deeper. For many narcissists, the cruelest truth is this: the show is over, and there is nothing left to hide behind. Envy sharpens like a knife in these final stages. Psychologists observe how unbearable it becomes for them to watch the very people they once hurt reclaim their lives, thriving, healing, rediscovering peace. Survivors walk free while the narcissist remains chained. From the sidelines, they seethe, consumed by the knowledge that the freedom others now enjoy is the one thing forever out of their reach. Their envy becomes their eternal punishment, a mirror of everything they lost and can never reclaim. Sometimes, they make desperate, final grabs for relevance. Psychologists describe how they stir conflict, spin dramatic stories, or plead for one last chance to be let back in. But by now, the pattern is undeniable. Their reputation arrives before they do, and instead of triumph, they are met with rejection, humiliation, and indifference. The games no longer work, leaving them stranded in the very powerlessness they once inflicted on others. On rare occasions, a sliver of clarity breaks through. Psychologists emphasize that some do glimpse the truth, that every downfall, every collapse, was carved by their own hands. This realization is both liberating and devastating. For a few, it sparks the first fragile steps toward growth. But for most, the weight of guilt and shame is too heavy. They retreat, drowning in despair rather than rising from it. The majority remain trapped in endless repetition. Psychologists explain that they cling to the same tired manipulations, recycling strategies that no longer fool anyone. They chase control that no longer exists, running in circles until the end. What remains is not peace, not redemption, but hollowness, a life echoing with the emptiness of power they never truly possessed. So what truly happens when it all ends for a narcissist? They rage, they deny, they manipulate, they spiral, they envy, they regret. But genuine healing almost never comes. Psychologists remind us, this is not punishment, but consequence, the inevitable end of a life built on lies. And the real victory is never in their downfall. It belongs to those who broke free, who chose peace, and who refused to let the narcissist's ending become their own. When it all ends for a narcissist, the crazy thing they end up doing. Every narcissist eventually reaches the moment they dread most, the breaking point. The charm that once hypnotized